The first taste of rare bourbon you finally got your hands on. That's nice. At Caskers.com, we make this experience easy. Caskers is a one-stop spirit curator with an impressive selection of exclusive, sought-after, rare, and household names in the realm of premium spirits and champagne. Discover the top flavors of the year now by going to Caskers.com and using code WELCOME10 for $10 off your first purchase. Get $10 off your first purchase with code WELCOME10 at Caskers.com.
Welcome to the Attention Deficit Disorder Expert Podcast Series by Attitude Magazine.
I'm pleased to welcome you to today's ADHD Experts presentation titled Men with ADHD, Solutions for Emotional Dysregulation, Anger, and Shame. Leading today's presentation is Alan Brown. Alan is an ADHD and productivity coach and host of Crusher TV, the award-winning video series designed for teens and adults with ADHD. He is a featured presenter at ADHD conferences in the U.S. and abroad, a TEDx speaker, and the best-selling author of Zen and the Art of Productivity. In today's webinar, we'll discuss how ADHD symptoms like emotional dysregulation manifest differently in men, and we'll offer strategies to effectively manage these challenges for men as well as for their partners and family members. We'd like to begin today's webinar by asking this poll question to our live audience. In what setting do you find it most challenging to regulate emotions brought on by ADHD? Please select your answers and comment in the text box under the video player to tell us more. For answers to common webinar questions about slides, transcripts, and certificates of attendance, click on the FAQ tab of your webinar screen. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 459 to access the webinar resources. And if you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. Our summer issue is full of expert advice to help you thrive in midlife and beyond. So sign up today for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Just click the magazine tab on your screen to learn more. Finally, the sponsor of this webinar is Inflow. Inflow is the #1 app to help you manage your ADHD. Developed by leading clinicians, Inflow is a science-based self-help program based on the principles of cognitive behavioral therapy. Join Inflow today to better understand and manage your ADHD. Click the link on screen to learn more. Attitude thanks our sponsors for supporting our webinars. Sponsorship has no influence on speaker selection or webinar content. So without further ado, I'm so pleased to welcome Alan Brown. Thank you so much for joining us today and for leading this discussion.
Hello, everyone. Thank you all for being here. Thanks to Attitude Magazine. And I just want to say, Charles, talking about the summer issue, this one, you can see this one is dog-eared because I just found so much good stuff in here that I just wanted to give it a salute. All right. So great magazine. And again, a delight to be here speaking to the Attitude Magazine audience. So some of you may know me as, let me just get my clicking ready here, as the creator of ADD Crusher. This is a virtual coach program for ADHD teens and adults, and also Crusher TV, which is a membership. And I'm also an advocate for our fellow ADHD peeps, in particular those who are out there as yet undiagnosed, as I was until I was 36. But also just a gentleman with ADHD. And as such, I can get sort of angry and emotional quickly. I can be impetuous, childish, irresponsible. In other words, immature compared to my peers. And most 22-year-olds, I would say, that I know. For years, I experienced embarrassment and shame about the progress of my career. I was a late bloomer in many ways. And over the years, I've learned that these traits These three, for instance, are just several that are more pronounced in ADHD men than in their women counterparts. And much indeed has been written about the unique challenges ADHD women face, and deservedly so. But there are many ways in which men experience and are impacted by their ADHD differently. Now, most of us, of course, are familiar with the fact that boys are more likely to be diagnosed than girls. This is in part because boys' ADHD is more likely to be exhibited in hyperactivity, whereas girls tend to be more of the inattentive type. But even in adulthood, most men are more likely to be diagnosed than women. But the issues particular to ADHD men are really many and varied. The characteristics I shared about myself being just a few. And it's important for us ADHD men and the people in our lives to better understand these differences. So let's get into some insights around how and why it can indeed be different for men, starting with later emotional development. Research has shown that males in general mature later than females. And if you overlay this fact with a later maturing for the ADHD population generally, that's kind of like, we ADHD males get a double hit, right? Writing an attitude, fairly recent issue, Ryan Wexelblatt, LCSW, noted that a typical ADHD 12-year-old, and I'm going to quote, could be 3 years behind their chronological age in terms of emotional maturity. And this can carry well into adulthood. The late Ellen Kingsley, the founder and former editor-in-chief of Attitude, reported that, and again quoting, many ADHD adults will not match the emotional maturity of a 21-year-old until their late 30s. Now, I can say that was definitely the case for me. My first wife was a few years younger than me, but while I didn't appreciate it at the time, she was definitely the adult in the room. And I was, frankly, looking back, kind of a child. And it's no wonder that marriage failed. And also looking back, I can see that emotional immaturity was something my father dealt with, or actually didn't deal with. He was an undiagnosed ADHD dad. Right up to his passing at age 86, he had many of these signature characteristics. Another characteristic is being quick to anger. While girls tend to have more ability to internalize emotions, boys are more likely to externalize theirs. And it stands to reason then that ADHD males have higher rates of oppositional defiant disorder, ODD. This is a pattern of anger, irritability, arguing, defiance, and also conduct disorder, which is ignoring age-appropriate social norms. As adults, we ADHD men may be more prone to outbursts of anger, fueled by any of a number of things, and we're going to cover some of those in a moment. Dr. Terry Dixon, a colleague of mine who works with ADHD men quite a bit, he describes a pressure cooker with tension building up, and if the stored up anger is not slowly released, explosive behavior may result. And this can be one of the most disruptive, if not destructive, aspects for the non-ADHD partner. And we'll get to some solutions for them as well as for us ADHD men in just a few minutes. But back to our unique issues. Challenges with caring for a child with ADHD. I work with a number of men who describe such occasional explosions of anger occurring when dealing with their ADHD child, while their spouse, whether ADHD or not, doesn't seem to have that hair trigger. And while I can't cite any research on this, I have lots of experience with parents where the men have trouble accepting their child has ADHD. My own father not only bristled at the idea that he himself may have been an undiagnosed ADHDer, but had a degree of contempt upon learning that at age 36, his son, was diagnosed and prescribed 2 drugs, one a mild antidepressant that's commonly used for ADHD. And he said, and I quote, that's a bunch of BS. You were always a happy kid. Now, that may be in part a generational thing, right? But I know too many moms who are trying to help their ADHD child without the full support of dad. And of course, there are a few vice versa instances too. Next is a greater resistance to pursue diagnosis or outside help. My father, being from a very different generation in terms of self-care and self-reflection, could be forgiven, I suppose, for ignoring blatant evidence of his undiagnosed ADHD. But too many 21st century men, ADHD men, young and older, continue to resist investigating their potential ADHD, leaving their frustrated partner or parent to do the footwork on their behalf. This suggests men have a greater fear of the stigma of the label, or to admitting to weakness, etc. As such, it's no surprise that a solid 2/3 of my customers, clients, email subscribers, and my social media followers, together numbering in the tens of thousands, so it's a pretty robust sample statistically, they are women. 2/3 are women. In other words, they're the ones most actively pursuing understanding and solutions on behalf of themselves, their husbands, and their kids. Indeed, in my many years of ADHD coaching, I've encountered countless women struggling with their husbands' or young adult sons' resistance to seek or accept an ADHD diagnosis. Yet, I can only remember a handful of instances where a male spouse or parent had that issue with their wife or daughter. And speaking of stigma, next is greater shame and guilt related to career achievement. This key issue for men arises in part from this social construct that still expects men to be the head of the household, the main breadwinner, et cetera. And when an ADHD man is not capable of optimally performing, in his job or career, as was the case for me for many years, or worse, has trouble holding jobs, the shame and guilt can be quite devastating. All the more so in a society that still equates career success with a person's value. I mean, think about how often new social interactions begin with, "So, hi, what do you do?" with the "do" closely entwined with who we are, right? And what is your value? And when you're not doing anything or not proud of what you do or how well you're doing it, you're not proud of being yourself. And then there's the simple and overlooked fact that there are greater challenges with working memory and academic performance in men. Of course, these two issues are common to all our ADHD brothers and sisters, but again, men may have it a bit tougher. Indeed, as reported in a recent issue of Attitude, according to research published in the Asian Journal of Psychiatry, men with ADHD show greater impairment than ADHD women in working memory and academic performance. Now, given all the aforementioned, it's fair to think that perhaps men generally experience greater mental and emotional stress as a result of their ADHD, which of course can result in more problems in the relationships with family, friends, colleagues, and themselves. Quoting Dr. Terry Dixon again, it is possible that these males feel worthless, guilty, and ashamed. A sense of failure may make them angry with themselves. The rage and anger that results may be taken out on loved ones. Expressions of anger may stem from feeling unlovable, out of control, or rejected. Now, all of this paints a pretty dark picture, right? But there are many things we can do to brighten our outlook for our future. And let's just start with some solutions for our awesome partners. A few ways loved ones can mitigate and better navigate our sometimes boiled over pressure cookers. Now, first and foremost is to be aware of his triggers. Both parties should have conversations about the things that most often set off an emotional or angry outburst, making them more understood, if not easier to avoid. And I'm going to provide some examples, some common examples in a sec. Don't take it personally, right? A loved one's anger can feel like a personal attack, but less so when viewed in its proper context. And then also see if you can introduce some levity. A lofty, yes, but achievable goal is to create a light sense of humor about it. My wife and I really have kind of achieved this. When I, as she calls it, do my thing, she knows to smile. She won't make fun of me, but just knowingly smile and just, kind of say, hey, man, you're doing your thing. And that always brings me back kind of into my body, as she would say. And it usually brings me a smile, too. And of course, consider seeking professional counseling or couples coaching, right? These are proven solutions. And so now to some solutions for my fellow ADHD men. First, we must get curious. See if you can connect some of your common frustrations and behaviors to any of the research or anecdotes outlined heretofore in this presentation. For example, being quick to anger, feelings of shame or guilt, tensions in your relationship, etc. See if you can get curious about those and make connections with those. This is all the more powerful if you're able to catch yourself in the throes of frustrated or anxious thoughts. And we know from the latest research, for instance, Judson Brewer at Brown University's Mindfulness Center, he's got a great book called Unwinding Anxiety. I think that's the title of it. It's been a few months since I read it. That, the simple act of getting curious about our most agitated thoughts, just being the witness to them, actually helps dilute their power over us. All right. Dr. Brewer says, to hack our brains and break the anxiety cycle, we must become aware of two things: that we are getting anxious and what results from that anxiety. It's a really simple yet powerful formula there. And the best way to be aware of impending anxiety is to know our triggers, right? You need to know your triggers. Indeed, one thing that can help in catching yourself in such moments is to know what is triggering, what is likely to trigger such a moment. So for instance, I can be triggered when being criticized for something I did wrong or forgot to do, even if trivial. Now, I've connected this to having grown up with an alcoholic father who seemed to make sport of catching me doing something wrong and then grilling me about it mercilessly. So it was very painful for me to be wrong. He made it even more, God rest your soul, buddy, but he made it more difficult, more painful to be wrong. And I did crack up every car I ever got behind the wheel of. So I guess he had some standing. But think about what other things might trigger your defensiveness or anger. And some classics are, of course, being made to feel less than, right? When your sense of fairness feels violated. This is a really big one for me. And I never realized this until I got to know David Gwork, who's the founder and president of the ADD Coach Academy, which is where I got my certification. And he talked about how one of his triggers is seeing unfairness somewhere, whether it is unfairness toward himself or to others. And that is me to the T. So that might be a trigger for you too. Keep an eye on that. And by the way, hats off to you for being ticked off about unfairness, but we don't necessarily need to have an outsized reaction to it. When you're feeling overwhelmed, right? You think about when you're busy with something, you're a little bit oversubscribed or overly taxed, and somebody says something to you or point something out, and you are more likely to respond with a snip or something, right? Or to become angry. Also, the old when you're tired, when you're hungry, right? When you're hungry, you're more likely to be grumpy. That's why they call it hangry, right? Hungry, angry. And I invite you to get curious about these and any others you can think of. Maybe you're taking a sticky and making a few notes on things that come up for you. I hope you are. And another solution I want to talk about is finding connection and community. Now, we need a place to share our struggles, and the right community gives us a safe place to do so and to be truly heard among others who battle the same challenges, right? The right community, whether that's an online peer group or an in-person support group or group coaching, can also be a place to exchange ideas and learn new things, right? New coping mechanisms, et cetera. And there we might even find accountability partners, right? Or even mentors, people who've been in our shoes, who've lived through and survived what we're battling every day. And then finally, we need to sharpen the saw. You may recognize this as Dr. Stephen Covey's seventh habit from his book, The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. He defines it generally as preserving and enhancing the greatest asset you have, you. So sharpening the saw certainly includes tending to your diet, exercise, and sleep, all of which have a direct impact on our ADHD challenges, not to mention our mood, right? But it also means making sure you're having some genuine fun on a regular basis, ideally with the people you love. I just got done with 2 days on a racetrack. I race motorcycles on a so like an F1 circuit, and if I didn't have that outlet, I call it, you'll forgive my language, I call it flushing my brain toilet. If I didn't have that outlet, I would be a much more easily triggered human being. So I hope you have some form of play that gives you just pure enjoyment, purposeless enjoyment. And I just want to add, being kind to yourself, right? That's sharpening the saw too. Pausing to take stock of your victories, of what you have and continue to accomplish, right? And giving yourself plenty of grace when you stumble, right? That's really big. And when we don't give ourselves grace, it just piles up. It piles up, and that can be that boiler that boils over, right? I'm going to throw in one more little bonus thing here, and that is to consider adding a gratitude practice to your day. Right? This doesn't have to be some meditation or anything, but there's a wonderful TED Talk by Sean Achor, who was at the time with the Harvard Business School. It's a delightful TED Talk where he talks about the research that he helped do that shows that when you just identify 3 things for which you're grateful every day for 20 some days, you start to change the brain circuitry in such a way as you start to see challenges more as opportunities, and it actually improves your mental acuity and your general mood and attitude. It's amazing research, and I've been doing it for about 7 years now. Every morning, I write down 3 things for which I'm grateful. I've got a little space in my planner. Here's today. One of the things I'm grateful for, by the way, is Attitude Magazine today. So, but really, and it really has helped me to be more grateful throughout the day. And when you're more in a mindset of gratitude, you are less likely to be triggered. So I'll just leave that at that. All right. Now, before we open things up for Q&A, I want to close with this thought. Understanding and working on these differences for ADHD men has really helped me to be more effective and fulfilled in my life as an ADHD adult. And I want to just emphasize this: more effective and fulfilled, not just less a pressure cooker, but I'm able to get more done. I'm able to have more success in what I'm doing. So this stuff is important, not just in our relationships, but in our overall life, our career, et cetera. And by the way, this, of course, certainly all the stuff certainly helps my clients. And I was mentioning to Carol before we went live here that I'm so grateful, no pun intended, grateful to have been asked to present on this, because I am seeing this stuff every single day with my clients, men and women, women on behalf of their men and men themselves. So again, there's a great opportunity here. So I hope this helps you or a loved one, someone you love as well. I also want to let you know how to get my, I have this wonderful little cheat sheet. I call it my formula for focus cheat sheet. These are 5 of my keys for more focus, even without meds. I use fewer and fewer meds every year. These are small and easy hacks for beating distraction and getting more done. And I use these every single day. I hope to take advantage and grab this at addcrusher.com/focus. That's addcrusher.com/focus. And with that, I want to open it up for questions. All right.
Well, thank you, Alan. Thank you so much. And we're grateful that you're here today to help guide our audience. So before we start the Q&A, I'd like to thank Inflow once more for sponsoring this webinar. I'd also like to share the final results from today's poll question. In what setting do you find it most challenging to regulate emotions brought on by ADHD? Here's what you said. 44% said in family relationships, 25% said in romantic relationships, 18% said at work, and 5% said with friends or at social gatherings. Now to our question. But actually, before we start that, we had quite a few people who say that unfairness was a big trigger for them as well. So, yeah, as you had mentioned. So now to our questions. Our therapist says that depression sometimes gets expressed as anger in men. Can you touch on how depression manifests in men with ADHD?
Wow. Well, let's just start with two facts. One, ADHD men and women are more likely to be diagnosed with depression. We are more predisposed to it from a number of angles. I won't get into any science or get in over my head on that. But the other thing too is if you just think about depression from a brain chemistry point of view, it is a dramatic change to our brain chemistry. So it affects our emotions, obviously, but as a result can also affect our behaviors, our outward behaviors. So I would only say that if you are battling or even suspect you are battling some depression, and I have battled it a couple of times in my life to the extent that I needed to get it clinically treated, then all of this really sort of gets magnified potentially, right? More sensitivity, maybe more shame, more moodiness. And so my duty really is to first and foremost invite anyone who is dealing with this to make sure that they are working with their doctor, that if there is something that is not working, and I'm not qualified to talk about medications, but there's something that you feel is not working, go back to that doctor and see if you can get a change in something. And if you even mildly suspect that there might be something going on, get with that doctor, ask those questions, and know that there are effective treatments for it. I hope that's helpful to you.
Another question is, can ADHD cause men to be abusive?
I would say, and I don't have stats on this, but I would say that, again, if we look at the triggers and the results of the triggers, if you were simply to magnify those somewhat, you can easily see a trajectory toward an abusive relationship or some kind of, I don't necessarily want to say violence, but some kind of, it could be emotional abuse, it could be physical abuse, it could be physical outbursts that are not controlled. So again, don't have any stats on that. It's a great question. But we also, and I would also say that to the extent that there are men out there who remain undiagnosed, who don't have any idea why they might be acting in a certain way. They just think that's kind of the way it is. They can't explain it. There may be a greater incidence of abuse in a relationship as a result of that. So again, these are two great questions that both deserve more conversation, I'd say, for sure.
Another question is, and we have variations of this question, I'm either confused or stunned when my partner gets dysregulated, and we haven't figured out how to identify it as it's happening to minimize hurt feelings. Do you have suggestions for that?
Yeah. So a key there is while it's happening, right? And I think the thing that we need to make sure we understand is that it can be very hard to have a productive conversation when there is an episode of triggeredness, as I'll call it, happening, right? I think of emotional dysregulation generally, right? You know, I actually wrote a blog about this, about how, these are from a few well-known personal development people who say, here's how you deal with anger or emotional outburst. Pause and breathe deeply, right? Replace negative thoughts with positive thoughts. How am I going to do that when I'm in the middle of an emotional dysregulation bout? My rational brain has been completely detached from me, right? And I don't mean to make light of this, but I just want to make the point that it can be nearly impossible to engage when there's a boil over point, because we don't have access to our better angels, let's just say, our rational brain. And the same may go for the partner who is also maybe getting frustrated, aggravated, and is as a result not, staying calm and being able to approach it the right way. So what that means is, this is why my first and foremost go-to is for both parties to understand the triggers before this stuff goes off. And so when we can get through that episode and get down to where we're having more of a regular day, is, hey, listen, let's talk about this. Tell me what it was that really set you off. Can we just talk about, because I don't want to do that to you anymore. So I want to do the right thing, et cetera. And having that conversation outside of the episode is going to be a lot more productive. So that's as good a piece of advice as I think you might get. Certainly my best piece of advice for that.
I have a sort of a similar question. Someone says, how can I keep myself and my children emotionally safe when my husband directs his outbursts at us?
Yeah. You entered the children into this, and that's, that to me increases the importance of not taking it personally and helping our children to understand what's going on. And it may be tricky how it is that you put that to the children. Say, look, Dad, Dad is, he gets triggered about certain things. He's working on it. We're working on it. But, the love is there. And that's just that. So, and you might even, talk about how in the kids, hey, so there are probably some certain things that make you really angry. Well, Dad has a range of things, maybe a longer list that really trigger him, and don't take it personally. He doesn't mean that when it's happening, and hopefully when this does happen and things after this happens, things do calm down. There is a conversation that can happen where all parties can talk about, I'm really sorry. That really freaked me out. And again, coming back to understanding what the things are that really trigger, what are the circumstances also where there might be more likelihood of a triggering event. Whether that is, again, when he is overwhelmed, when hungry, when tired, when feeling put upon, or feeling less than. So I think one of the things that I've learned too is that kids are really smart, and they are really able to absorb more, I'll just say, sophisticated conversations than I would say I was at a young age, 6, 7, 8, 13, whatever that was, because I just feel that generally in society, we broach these subjects openly and in entertainment and in just society in general, that, kids are able to have some pretty mature conversations about things. And so that maybe that's one way you go at that is working with the kids on better understanding the things that we've been talking about here. Maybe not to the same actual degree, maybe not in the same language, etc.
A woman asks, how can I help my husband who does not take responsibility for his actions? There's always someone else to blame, our kids or someone else. If he doesn't take ownership for his behavior, what do you recommend?
Yeah, this is a big one. That's a big one. You know, when I work with clients, men and women who are dealing with the men's outbursts, behavior, etc. The fact that they are talking to me as a coach means that they are both taking this seriously and that they are both taking some responsibility. Where there is a lack of taking any responsibility, I feel that might be where you start to look at professional help, some counseling or a relationship coach, excuse me, because that becomes something that is difficult for the partner to try to break through. And if you think about the denial of having responsibility in these situations, you know, that's a tougher nut to crack than, hey, let's just talk about your triggers. If we're not even accepting responsibility for what happens after I get triggered, there's not even going to be a conversation about, hey, yeah, it was just because I was triggered by this. Let's talk about these triggers and how we can avoid it. That conversation isn't really going to be in the offing if we haven't cracked into the taking of responsibility. So that's what I would say. I would, at that point, I would look into some professional counseling on that.
Another question is, my husband says he'll do something and then forgets, and he becomes unreliable in my mind. This impacts the trust I have in him. How can we manage this?
Yeah. So this is a classic thing with ADHD generally, right? Where, and it's funny, I was just reading the article by Brendan Mahan, a friend and colleague. If you haven't read it yet, it's a wonderful, it's about ADHD, embracing fatherhood, right? It's this article, if you haven't seen it. And I'll just use the example that he does, which is with a child. And so what we do when we have an ADHD child, whether we're ADHD or not, we will see the child having been asked to put the dirty dish in the dishwasher and told, yes, I'll do that. And then 20 minutes later, it's still not done. 2 hours later, it's still not done. The next morning, it's still not done. And our reaction, if we're not sort of well-versed in this, our reaction is, why is he disrespecting me, right? Why can't he get his blank together? Why is he defying me? Why isn't he listening? And right? And we have to remember, and it is not an excuse, but an explanation, that he may want to do it. He may have tried to do it. But this is some of the classic stuff that just doesn't happen happen easily with the ADHD brain. So again, I would make sure that we're checking that box of, I'm not going to take this personally. I do not believe that he is doing this to tick me off. I do not believe he's doing this to disrespect me. I've got to look at his behavior in the context of ADHD. And the way Brendan talked about it with regard to a child, I think you could make a similar, take it from at a similar angle, even with an adult partner, is to say, hey, listen, man, we're trying to get this thing done. I asked you a few times to do it. What's going on? How can I help you? And I'll tell you what, if maybe tell me what you would need from me to help you get this thing done, et cetera. That would maybe be a starting point. Again, if we take it personally, now we're going to be triggered. Now we're triggered, right? Now it's easier said than done to not take it personally and to be, oh, that's there he goes again. And it is difficult when you're dealing with life and the kids and everything going on and a whole bunch of other frustrations that are caused by this ADHD behavior and, non-attending to things, et cetera. But we, as that party who can be the witness to it, we do have an opportunity to be a little bit more tempered and rational and mindful. I think it's a good word when we're dealing with this.
Another question is from an undiagnosed 55-year-old man. He says that he has many of the behaviors of ADHD. He says, my overriding symptom is rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which interacts with my immaturity and my wanting to be liked throughout my whole life, which ends up with me feeling rejected. Is this pattern of behavior typical? Is there a way out of this thinking?
Yes. And to a great extent, yes, to the second question. So the reason I smiled is because I just so identify with that. I am someone who suffered from low self-esteem, in part from growing up as the child of an alcoholic, which, you are always kind of made to feel less than, made to feel wrong. And as a result of that, you are always being a people pleaser. You are always trying to, compensate even when you don't need to. I experienced this just the last 2 days while on a racetrack with some people that are running the organization that puts on the racing days. And I see myself like overcompensating to make sure that I'm seen as likable, Now that's on the sort of the mild side, but the emotional dysregulation or the what was a rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is an even more powerful brand of that emotional emotional sensitivity, right? This is something that can be really paralyzing, and that deserves to get looked at with the help, I believe, of a coach. At the very least. And so, listen, I also want to say that this gentleman has really identified some things that really are kind of classic ADHD stuff. So if you suspect that you're ADHD, I'd get with my doctor. Ideally, you get with a specialist who really works a lot in ADHD, because there are a lot of general practitioners who still, unfortunately, don't get it or may kind of write it off as something else. With all due respect to whoever your doctor is. But I would definitely seek a diagnosis. There are a bunch of free online tests that can just give you a sense. Maybe you've already taken one. There is one at addcrusher.com. There's a little quiz there. But this is big stuff you're talking about. Don't sweep it under the rug. And one last thing I'll say, you're 55. You can begin a new life by getting a diagnosis and starting to work with that. Very quick anecdote. I was speaking here in San Diego before a group pre-pandemic, full room of people. And I always ask before I start presenting, and so who wants to tell us a little bit about their ADHD story, as I call it? Like, how did you discover or whatever? And I tell a little bit about my story and to prompt the audience. And this gentleman who was sitting right in the front row, I'd never seen him in this space before. I spoke there about once a month. And he was an elderly gentleman. And he said, and he raised his hand. He said, I am 86 years old, and I was diagnosed at 80, and the last 6 years have been the best years of my life. That's a direct quote from that gentleman. I'll never forget it as long as I live. And I just want to say that however old you are, he wasn't diagnosed until I was 36. I just started working with a gentleman who is 56 and got diagnosed just 2 years ago. You go explore that, and you will be rewarded for it. That's the first step.
Wow, being diagnosed in your 80s and really thriving after that. That's incredible.
Yeah.
Sort of similar to that, a woman writes, my husband doesn't recognize he has ADHD. So the flip side, how can I persuade him he needs help? He won't listen and he shrugs it off.
Yeah, that's a tricky one too. Right. And that is a classic ADHD in men thing where they are less likely to pursue or accept an ADHD diagnosis. So this can be really a tricky one. I think that one thing we can do is look at, do some research, if you haven't already, around the evidence of the existence of ADHD first and foremost, and also how you portray ADHD. And the way I talk about it is, I'll never forget the first time I saw this image. And it was, some of you may be familiar with this, but it was a functional MRI, fMRI image of brain activity in a neurotypical brain and an ADHD brain. And it shows that this frontal cortex area was lit up with activity, and that same area was not lit up in ADHD. And so one of the reasons that men and others sort of don't want to talk about, an ADHD diagnosis, because it means I'm broken. It means there's something wrong with me. It means that I'm weaker, right? Some of the things we talked about. There's the stigma of it. But when I look at that scientific thing that simply says, hey, I just have a brain that doesn't have the available dopamine that other people have. And as a result of that, it's more difficult for me to plan. It's more difficult for me to stay motivated. I am more likely, this is aptly explain why I was a drug addict for a good number of years. I was self-medicating, trying to get that dopamine there. So I think one thing we can do is just get sort of boned up on the scientific background of ADHD, and also, identifying some of those things that he may be doing on a regular basis and putting them in non-threatening, loving even terms. When you say, hey, listen, this thing that you are frustrated about with not being able to do so-and-so and so-and-so, that could be that dopamine thing. Why don't we go and just explore it a little bit together, And I'll also say this, have him reach out to me. Have him reach out to me if he just wants to have a discussion about somebody who went 36 years without the diagnosis and suffered greatly by not having it. I mean that seriously. You can just send me an email, info@addcrusher.com. Serious.
Oh, I bet you're going to get lots of emails now.
No, I'm here to serve.
Someone asks, are men or women with ADHD more prone to infidelity and more prone to make decisions that are perhaps against their moral character?
That's a great question. So I don't know of any statistics on infidelity specifically, but what we can look at is one of the DSM-5's descriptors of ADHD. More likely, and by the way, this relates to the dopamine. As a result of not having the available dopamine that the neurotypical brain has, we are more impulsive. Another thing, and this particularly affected me, we are more likely to engage in risky behaviors, risk-taking. My teenage years, you don't even want to know. It was crazy. I mean, not to mention when I was a drug addict, I was going to Harlem at the height of the crack epidemic to buy drugs. It's just insane. And I was willing to take that risk. I had just been taking risks. I was doing 145 miles an hour yesterday on a motorcycle. So, but that's a healthy addiction / risk. So I would say that I do not have statistics to back this up, but I would say that if you look at the ADHD brain and the description of ADHD with regard to impulsivity, making decisions quickly without thinking about it, and also impulsivity where we're pursuing something because there is some quick reward or dopamine or feel-good thing happening with it. I would say that is certainly a good possibility that could be the case. It's not to say that there aren't plenty of non-ADHD people who are out there not living good values. But I do think that with these characteristics I just described, one may be more likely to trip up.
Another question is, do you have advice for a young man who is about to enter, a young adult who is about to enter the workforce and who sometimes loses his cool?
Yeah. Great question. The first thing I would go to is come back and rewatch this presentation if you can. And go back and maybe you already did a little bit of note taking, but identify your triggers. You going into a new workplace or into a workplace anew, and good for you. Congratulations, by the way, on whatever that job is that you've secured. And congratulations also, and I mean this really seriously, on knowing that about you, having that self-awareness. I mean, this is half the battle. You talk about an ADHD adult, a grown man who is not willing to take responsibility for things, not willing to consider an ADHD diagnosis, pursuing it or accepting it. That is in part a lack of self-awareness. So hats off to you for being self-aware that you're here today and you're asking this very smart question. So take a look at your triggers, right? And, make sure, maybe even make a list of those. And, I have little stickies that remind me of important things that I keep, in my planner so that I see these are my two main ones. I won't tell you what they are, but these are two things that I need to keep at the top of my brain all the time. And maybe you make that little sticky list. Maybe you write it in code somehow. And so in case somebody sees it there and go, oh, these are your whack job things, right? No, it's just a list of things that maybe are written in code that remind you of, hey, I got to watch out for this. I got to watch out for that. I got to watch out for that. And the first place I go is with the fundamentals, diet, sleep, exercise, and make sure that you've got those things. If I asked you on a scale of 1 to 10, how good's your diet? Protein instead of sugar and carbs. How good's your exercise? 3 20-minute sessions of some kind of cardio where you're breaking a sweat every week. Sleep. Are you getting the 8 hours? Maybe you even need more as a young man. And if any of those is below a 6, go start working on the lowest one. That is a universal reduction in trigger likelihood just by taking care of those 3. All right. But and also I would say be very conscious of the things once you enter that job. What are the things that you're sort of observing that might be future triggers? Oh, this person has a certain attitude or whatever. And I'm not saying that you go out and start bad mouthing people or whatever, or looking for bad things, but maybe it's a certain task that you are asked to do regularly in this job that is, maybe bracing for you, or you might have some resentment or whatever. But again, look at those triggers, take a look at the job, see if you can identify some things that might be trouble going forward. And again, I salute you seriously for having the self-awareness and the wisdom to be here and ask that question and consider it. Yay for you.
Another question is, how do you deal with task management, especially in highly stressful situations?
So, highly stressful situations and having to deal with a task. So, the pat answer on this is, and it's not, I say pat answer, meaning it's sort of the easy, short answer, but it doesn't mean that it is not true. But, we need to separate what we can control versus what we can't control. I did a great interview with a friend of mine who happens to be the lead test pilot on the F-22 and the F-117. He's a real guy. He's an amazing, amazing guy. And he talked about thriving under pressure. And of course, what fighter pilots do, and even more so test pilots who are in a new plane that could go down, is compartmentalization. Just being able to go, okay, there's this high pressure situation, a high stress situation. I've got this task to do. I'm going to just try to compartmentalize and say, okay, that is what it is. I can't change that. I need to still do this. So there's sort of the pat answer. The other thing that we can do is, and this is a little tougher to do, but if you can make a note of this and maybe have this available. Again, I use stickies to just remind me of key principles that I need to see every day. And ask yourself, all right, what is hard about this? What is threatening about this? Where is the stress coming from? Again, it's about self-awareness, right? That's about sort of, looking at our potential triggers and go, okay, but just stepping aside, being the witness to the situation we're in, going, yeah, so this is really freaking me out. I don't like this situation. I have to do this thing over here. Just that exercise actually starts to reduce your cortisol production. And when your cortisol production goes down, you're now getting more oxygen to your brain and your frontal cortex. And now you're able to think more and problem solve better. That may sound a little bit kooky, wacko, but it's really a very simple exercise that is supported in the research. And again, I refer back to Judson Brewer, who talks about, we really just need to realize two things. One, that we are getting a little bit, stressed or triggered or whatever. And then what can I do about this? Or, what is the task at hand, sort of, and just looking at it more soberly. We got to get out of that event. We have to get out of that cycle, as Brewer calls it, get out of that thing and step aside and be the witness. So those are a couple of tricky things, but I invite you to start there.
Someone asks, what is the best way to overcome shame and guilt? The self-punishment seems to be constant. Yeah.
You folks are probably familiar with what's known as the negativity bias, right? This is the Daniel Kahneman, I think it was the guy who discovered this, University of Florida, I think, back in the 80s or early 90s. And what we are able to see is that we give about 3 times more, we give much more attention to negative things than we do to positive things. And we have about 3 times more negative thoughts than we do positive thoughts. And it's evolutionary. We are sort of designed to be worried about negatives, right? You don't want to be out, on the Serengeti going, oh, look at the nice kitty. Isn't that look at the beautiful stripes on that thing? Now, you don't want to be seeing the positive. You want to be seeing it. No, that's a tiger, and I'm about to get mauled. In the same way, we don't look at our victories. We don't score our successes. And and that results, when we're only looking at the negatives, what results? Shame, less self-confidence, less value that we see in ourselves, etc. And maybe also guilt for being where we are. Again, I battled this. My first years as an executive, I was just floundering. And I also, because I was a junkie for the most of my 20s, I didn't start my career, my entry-level job in corporate until I was 30. Everybody that was at my level was 8 years younger than me. So it was tremendous shame, etc. Now, let me get to the solution here. I really genuinely, lovingly invite you to do a little exercise that is known as the 7 stories. I learned this from executive coach, who's a dear friend. And what you do is I invite you to write 25 things about which you're proud. 25 instances where you were kind of in flow or you did something that, again, you're proud of. And it could be something when you were 4 years old. I mean that seriously. It could be something when you were 12. Could be something that just happened last week or in a recent job or whatever. Identify 25 things that you're proud. It doesn't have to be 25. It could be 30. It could be 14. But then what you want to do is step back and circle the top 7, the ones that you're most proud of, right? And then you ask 3 questions about each one of those. You write a little paragraph on each one, just 1 or 2 sentences that says what it was you accomplished in a little bit of detail, why you're so proud of it. Why am I so proud of this thing? And then how you did it. What skill or value or character attribute of yours did you bring to it? This is something we never think about. But if you do this exercise, and it shouldn't take you more than 45 minutes to do it, I invite you to give yourself the gift of time to do it, really. And then what happens is you go back and you read those 7 paragraphs, you will see a pattern. And you go in and you highlight things that appear a bunch of times. And what you're going to find are some strengths of yours. Not to mention you've just reminded yourself of 7 great things. And they don't have to be big things. They don't have to be Nobel Prizes. They can be, I helped out a friend on this one little thing that maybe nobody even knows about, but that you're proud of. And you will find some values that attend to who you are and strengths, and you'll remind yourself of these accomplishments. And I'll leave it at that. There's a little bit more you could do with this, but if you just start doing that, I tell you, that's the first step on the path toward beating down shame and feeling less than and feeling like you can't do anything. All right?
Well, unfortunately, we're out of time, but that's a great note to end on. So, Alan, thank you so much for joining us today and for sharing your stories and your expertise with our ADHD community.
Thank you.
And thanks to today's listeners. We hope to see you again next week. Make sure you don't miss future Attitude webinars, articles, or research updates by signing up to receive our free email newsletters at attitudemag.com/newsletters. If you're listening in replay or podcast mode, visit attitudemag.com and search podcast 459 to access the webinar resources. And if you support the work we're doing here at Attitude to strengthen the ADHD community, we encourage you to visit attitudemag.com/subscribe and sign up for Attitude Magazine. Sign up today for yourself or to share with a teacher or a loved one who could benefit from greater ADHD understanding. Thank you. Have a great day.
For more Attitude podcasts and information on living well with attention deficit, visit attitudemag.com. That's ADDITUDEMAG.com.